You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we're going to wrestle with a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. It's the idea of avoiding burnout and some of the other common frustrations that happen in the business world. And this is true whether you're a leader in a Fortune 500 company or a good and growing small business privately held. Leaders at the top struggle many different things, and my guest today is going to share his story of something he did in the process of building a seven-figure business. His name is Joe Garner, and we're going to say hello. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hey, Doug, thanks for having me on today. I'm excited to kind of delve into this topic.
I'm really intrigued by your backstory. You were a guy that had started building a business and making great things happen, and then all of a sudden, it kind of crashed at high speed into that proverbial brick wall. So tell folks that backstory, if you will.
Yeah, certainly. I wouldn't say that it was a high-speed crash. This was a very long and arduous crash. Yeah, I was the frog in the water that was boiling. So background, went to college for business, knew I wasn't going to get into the corporate world. I didn't apply to a single corporate position. I never did any internships. I just knew that that was not the pathway for me. When I got out of college, an opportunity showed up to help a buddy's dad. He was getting a business started. Originally, it was going to be a 6-month thing, kind of help him get going. And then, me and his son would kind of move on. We were getting into the business and we realized there's a lot of potential here. We actually enjoyed what we were doing. And what we started was, it was equipment rental and event rentals. So we were doing kind of smaller homeowner equipment. And then we did pretty large scale events, weddings, corporate events, and large backyard parties, things of that nature. I really enjoyed it. Loved making the connections, loved leading people, loved being the one that was getting to make the decisions for the company and then seeing how those decisions played out. So about 5 years in, we had grown to 7 figures. By the 7th year, we had crossed into multiple 7 figures and just continued to grow and grow and grow all through my 20s. It wasn't until probably about 27, 28 that I started to realize that things were starting to become overwhelming, that what used to bring me joy no longer was bringing me joy. And along this process, I had, unfortunately, didn't have the mentorship and the foresight to build systems into the business that started to remove me from the business. So I kind of got late into that. And at that point where I started burning out, I actually did start building systems and creating, kind of divisions and organizations inside the organization that helped us kind of get to a point where it was a little bit more sustainable. But even at that point, even 2, 3, 4 years later, I still felt this overwhelming sense of burnout, of discontent with everything that I had been building, everything that I was doing. Even, maybe 2 or 3 years later after the process, I realized it, but I was clinically depressed for probably 2 to 3 years of running and owning the business, and just noticing the difference when I would show up in that kind of depressed, overwhelmed state and how that affected everybody else in the business. And then, 2, 3 days later, you'd come back, you'd have some excitement, something went well, you were just joyful to be there again, and how that changed. And that experience of understanding the shift that happens when a leader is showing up burnout and frustrated versus showing up excited and ready to, create change within the organization. Those two differences were stuck out to me so sorely. So continuing down that road, I was making little changes, but I wasn't changing anything inside of me. I wasn't changing how I was showing up, like how I was dealing with the stress and the overwhelm. And eventually it got to a point where physical injury was the only way that I was going to slow down enough to do the healing that I needed. And that's what
Yeah.
happened. I had a back injury. I burst a disc between my L4, L5, was basically bedridden for almost 3 months. It happened right in the middle of summer, so I missed all of the summer. It wasn't until probably September that I kind of came back to work. And in that time, it gave me a lot of opportunity to think about, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing all of this stuff? Why am I putting myself through this frustration and pain and anxiety to what? To have more money, to build a new house, to get a new car, to have all the money that I ever wanted. And that was a huge turning point for me. Was disassociating my success with how much money necessarily that I was making. So the back injury comes into it. I find yoga. My doctor basically tells me, you have two choices. You can either swim in a pool or you can take on yoga. And I tried swimming. I hated it. I felt like I was drowning every single moment. So I found yoga. Through yoga, I found meditation. Through meditation, I found kind of deeper esoteric knowledge in what humans are and how they've evolved over the years. And now where I'm at this point is helping people understand who they truly are inside, what they are capable of, and letting go of these limiting beliefs of who they've been told that they are over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing story in this whole idea of really getting connected with your own sense of being and purpose. There's a famous quote by Mark Twain: two important days in a person's life, the day you were born and the day you figure out why. And I saw that, and anybody that's been listening to my show for a while has heard this story, but I'm going to repeat it. It is worth repeating. I experienced this in a big way, not just personally, but kind of corporately in the crash of '08, the big financial crisis. And I had I had been forced to close a company because of that crisis. So I was in a little bit of a quandary. I had lost a little bit of my own sense of identity and purpose by having to close the company. And I still had an entrepreneurial fire. So I started a nonprofit for, of all things, job seekers, people that were also had been given pink slips, most of them for the first time in their life, and they had no idea what to do or where to turn. And very quickly, what I discovered was, in this forced change, when a person's been working a career path their whole adult life, and all of a sudden it's pulled out from under them, people weren't suffering a medical issue like, the back injury, but they were definitely suffering an emotional injury because their identity in the work they were doing had been stripped away. It was just gone. And they were now forced to revisit the whole sense of purpose and redefine who and what they were. So we quickly pivoted our coaching and our assistance work that we were doing to start by helping people do work to re-engage with themselves, really do a soul searching exercise to define what a real passion was. And we had a couple of tools we used, and I can talk about those later, but we help people really first connect with their sense of being and who and what they really should be and could be. And for a lot of people in our program, and over a couple of year period, we coached over 4,500 people in job change. The people that really kind of locked into a new sense of identity and purpose, like you said, they showed up with a whole elevated level of energy, a whole level of excitement, when they really grounded themselves in their own sense of meaningful purpose, they could go look for opportunities that fit that purpose rather than find a job just to get a paycheck.
Right.
And we had a very high success rate, all things considered. And, people were much more fulfilled, and they felt that now their work for the first time might be rewarding. And I can't tell you how many people said, that, boy, this is amazing. I've spent 10, 15, 20 years on this career path. And it sucked. I hated it. The truth be told, I didn't enjoy it at all, but opportunities kept coming my way. And so I took the new paycheck and it was fine. And then all of a sudden, the industry collapsed and they were, without a job. So let's talk a little bit about your experience and some of the work you're doing now. You're talking about helping people, find that grounding and sense of purpose. What do you typically do with folks when you meet them and get started on that path for them?
Yeah, yeah. So kind of going back to what you said, I really liked how you said it, that 2008 was an opportunity to kind of reset and really understand what was purposeful, what was meaningful in people's lives. And I think this is what happens throughout everybody's experience in life is they have these opportunities, and you can view them as tragedies or opportunities to strip away this story that you've told about yourself throughout your entire life, right? We have all these stories starting from when we're 0 to 7, when we're in the theta brainwave state, and we're basically taking on the beliefs of everybody around us. That's what the theta brainwave state does. You are basically hypnotized by everything around you, and you take those beliefs and bring them into your core. And then as you go through life, the goal of the growth in life is not about putting more information into your mind. It's about taking all of these stories that you've come up with about who you are and what you do and why you do it, and removing those and slowly removing them until you get down to this core of who you truly are. So that's a lot of the process that I do. It starts with mindfulness. I've got 4 core pillars: mindset, mindfulness, intuition, and then purpose. It really does start with mindfulness. So the human being, especially in today's world, has basically created a feedback loop inside of their mind. When they have a thought, their body has a physiological response. So when you have a thought about pain or suffering, your body has the exact same physiological response that it would if you put your hand on fire, or there was a tiger in front of you. It has the exact same physiological response. So people have been entrained, they've been entrenched to, when they have a thought, their body responds. And what mindfulness meditation disassociates your thoughts from the physiological response. So what you're teaching your body to do is to notice that you're having a thought, because again, you're gonna have anywhere from 40 to 60,000 thoughts every single day. You're gonna have the thoughts, but do you need to associate your physical response, your biological response to those thoughts? And the answer is a resounding no. You do not have to become your thoughts. And that's kind of the first part of disassociating the story of who you are with the thoughts that you've been continually having. Then we kind of move into mindset. So it's becoming aware of the stories and the let's call them patterns that you're living in your life that you're just unaware of. 95% of your experience is unconscious, and in order to understand that 95% of the unconscious experience that you're having, you have to separate yourself from those thoughts. You have to have a good mirror, a good mentor, a good coach, somebody who's going to reflect back to you these subconscious beliefs that what happens is your reticular activating system basically edits them out of your awareness. So you're only aware of that 5%, and this 95% of who you are or who you're being is just out of your awareness. Then we dive into intuition. Intuition is just being able to communicate with that subconscious, with the subconscious nervous system, being able to determine what your subconscious mind, and again, we can kind of go into what the subconscious is. It's really just an awareness of everyone and everything around you. We are fundamentally connected to each other on a much deeper basis than just physicality, just our five senses. There's an intuition, a sixth sense that we are capable of achieving. Again, if we can turn that reticular activating system off and allow these six senses to become part of our conscious experience. And then finally, purpose. And that's one that I think you and I very much agree on, is that without this overwhelming sense of purpose, it's like jet fuel. If you're just going to work for a paycheck, you're putting gasoline into your plane or into your sports car, regular unleaded gasoline. If you want to truly grow, if you want to live life from a experience of total growth, then you've got to put jet fuel into your system. And what purpose is that jet fuel. You're going to get excited every single morning to wake up, to have the opportunity to work on whatever that project is that you're working, or be the parental figure for your kids. Like, you're excited to be that because your purpose is to raise the best children that you have, right? It's easy to show up as the best version of yourself when you have this true purpose in your life.
Yeah. You packed a number of things in there, and I want to do a little bit of unpacking here. Number one, what comes to mind, your mention of those thousands and thousands of thoughts that we let percolate in our brain every day. There's also a Mark Twain quote that goes with that. And he said, in his later life, he said, "I've discovered that most of my life has been a series of horrible tragedies and disasters, most of which never happened." And
Right.
the point being, you see a situation emerging, and your brain spins up, and all of a sudden you're thinking about all these what if things. Oh my gosh, what if that happens, and what if that happens, and what if I lose this and do that, and I'm sure there's a psychology there about some personalities do that worse than others, but I think as a human beings, we're all guilty of it in some form. Part of which I've learned in my own effort to study a little bit about brain science and the dynamic organ that the brain can be for us, pro or con. Part of the protection is, some of that spin up that happens has to do with survival. Our brain's number one job is to help us survive and, fight the bear in the cave and whatever it takes, to survive. So when we anticipate change, we go into potentially this fight or flight mode. And what the brain scientists tell us, the unfortunate part of that, all of that processing in the brain happens in another region, totally disconnected and void from the frontal lobe, where our logical thinking happens and our creativity and our ability to do good work. So if we're in a constant state of fight or flight, we're really not doing good work. Because that part of the brain is just literally disengaged. So I think as leaders, it's important to realize when you feel that pressure starting to mount, you've got to do something to break that chain, and don't let it spiral out of control and to the dark side, where I bring in your other point about trying to dissociate the thought in the mind with the physiological response in the body, because that physiological response is also part of the fight or flight mechanism. The adrenaline starts pumping, all the things, all battle stations are on DEFCON 5, and you're ready to go to war, and that's just not productive for the long run.
No, it doesn't help you at all in your leadership role, in your in your guidance role within the organization when you're in that fight or flight state. And what also happens is essentially when you get into that fight or flight state, your brain monopolizes the processing power of your brain to focus only on a very tiny subset of everything else that's going on. You're only focused on how do I get out of this situation alive, basically. And
Exactly.
instead of being able to tune into the infinite wisdom, or that 95% of you, your subconscious mind, instead of being able to use that information to make better decisions, to understand what's actually happening, is this even a fight or flight situation, or have I just kind of spun this up in my mind? You can't use any of that 95%. And again, that 95%, the subconscious mind, from my perspective, and this is where we are with a lot of the science, like the cutting edge science, organizations like the Heart Math Institute, or the Institute of Noetic Sciences. These organizations have been showing that the subconscious mind is connecting to an infinite realm of intelligence, things that are beyond our what we think is possible for humans. We're actually connecting to these things through our subconscious mind. And in that state, when you're able to access this intelligence, your intuition, your subconscious, you gain clarity beyond anything you could have ever imagined, beyond reading all the textbooks, beyond going to school for 40 years. Like, you gain this infinite amount of intelligence that you're able to use to move you towards these goals.
Well, let's also, I'm going to turn another page here. Also, in what you were talking about is the kind of the need to perhaps unlearn some of the programming that was input, whether it was in the early years, maybe, first through 12th grade, or even beyond a little bit with the path. And I go back to the jobs situation of '08. So many people that came to us, and when they started really thinking about the journey they had been on, many times stories were, well, that's what my dad wanted me to do. My dad was an engineer, so he wanted me to be an engineer, or my dad was a lawyer, he wanted me to be a lawyer. And it was this programming that totally alienated the natural bent that had emerged in this individual. And so a lot of times we were breaking down those walls and helping them unlearn some of the things. And in some cases, it's very emotional experience, because you basically had to stand up to that father, mother, family tradition idea and say, that's not me. I'm not that person. I need to be somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this kind of gets into the idea of the ego death, of allowing that version of yourself to die, so that a new version of yourself can be, born, can come through. And it's not an easy process. The death and rebirth process is not easy at any level of biology, but it's a very important process for growth. If you kept all the cells in your body from when you were born until you died, you would only live maybe 2 years. Your cells in your body are dying and being reborn over and over and over again. But it gives this illusion of continuity, because only a small portion of them die and are reborn as you experience life. And this is the same thing with your personality, with your personal reality, is that there's these little bits of you that served you at different times in your life. But if you don't let those versions die and new versions come in, well, then you're just going to get stuck. And that's where I was stuck in my late 20s of being this business person that was creating all of this opportunity for others in the world, while completely negating the fact that I wasn't teaching them how to be, good leaders, good people. I was just teaching them how to have a job, basically. And that that pull of, this old version of me and then this new version that was coming through. I mean, that was such a painful process to dissolve a business partnership, to tell the guys that I've been in leading and in charge of for the last 8 or 10 years that, hey, I'm moving on. Like I've got other things to do. That really hurt, and it took probably a year to fully get comfortable with this idea of that version of myself not being a part of who I am, and this new version of myself kind of starting to show up. And as you go through that process, it gets easier and easier, but it doesn't get easy. It just you're just familiar with that process of, and it sounds like you've done it a number of times with different businesses, different coach you're doing, and you're all kind of shift. If you had stayed with that first initial coaching program that you had, I mean, we were talking earlier how even right now your coaching program is kind of shifting a little bit. So, as you get familiar with this process of change, it does become easier. But that first big shift or change, because you've just been on autopilot for 10 or 15 years, it can be shocking and difficult to go through.
Yeah, you're right, and I tell the story in my early career. I was commissioned in the Army right out of college. I went on active duty for several years and then decided to leave that and go into the business world. And I joined a large regional bank, but I was hired for leadership and management, and that was my vision of what I thought I needed to be. I studied management in school. I was reading all the books about leadership and leadership development. I was just a voracious learner in that area. It was exciting to me to think about that. And the bank team that hired me saw that, and they put me in a management program. And sure enough, in no time, I was appointed head of a unit for the bank, and thus ensued a 15-year career of progressive leadership growth. And everything I did was leading teams and doing work and building teams. And then one day, my boss walks in and says, "You're not the manager here anymore." And I went, "What?" And and I was asking the big question, why? I've had this long run. I've been earning bonus checks, and everybody been telling me good work, good job, big numbers and all that. And just very mysteriously, they didn't want me to run the unit anymore. And I was a division head. I had about 350 employees. And I'm like, what did we do wrong? Tell me which wheel fell off. And I went to the vice chairman of our bank, who was my skip level, several levels up. And I said, "You've got to give me an answer. I mean, I'm a big boy. I can take it. I just would like to know why." And he shook his head and he said, "You're never going to get that answer." And I was devastated, but that was on a Friday, and I went home and kind of simmered on it all weekend. And I came to the revelation that, I had wanted to be a leader and a manager my whole career. And that's up to that point, I was now close to the 20-year mark of doing that, combining the military with the banking. And I said to myself, you know what? I wanted to be in the big leagues. I am in the big leagues. Even the big league players, they have slumps and they get traded, they get moved around. And maybe they have a rebirth with a new team, a new organization. I said, so maybe that's what I'm facing. And in the moment there, the company was not telling me to leave, and they weren't firing me, but they just said, "We just don't want you to as the manager of this division anymore. I said, "What am I supposed to do?" And they said, "Well, you're going to have to figure something else out. And, you can look around." And what ultimately ended up happening, to make the long story short, is the very division I had been managing for several years. I had been campaigning to get a dedicated sales team in my division. I was getting ancillary sales support from other parts of the company, but I felt like we could really grow the business if I had my own dedicated sales team. And they said, "Why don't you do that sales thing you've been wanting to do?" And I said, "I'm not
Mm.
a salesman. That's what are you talking about? I've told you I want to hire a salesman. I don't want to be the salesman." And they said, "Well, we're just saying that's one choice. You know the business. Why don't you try that?" And I thought about it a little bit more, and I said, "Okay, deal." And
Hmm.
so for the next 3 years, I was the senior sales lead for this same division, and I had to. Some say, "How in the world did you swallow your pride? You used to lead that whole thing, and now you're just one of the guys on the team." And I said, "It was a choice. It was a matter of kind of re-engaging my brain." And truth be told, those last 3 years, I made more money at the bank as a sales guy than I ever did as a manager because
Right.
I had all kind of sales incentives in the program and uh, knew the business. So I was able to go out and, really get some things done. And sure enough, so yeah, the bottom line, the whole point of that story is you got to be willing to do that, death and rebirth. And, it's an ego death, definitely, because I always saw myself as a manager leader in that company. And now all of a sudden they told me I wasn't. And that was an undeniable truth I couldn't overcome, So my choice was either to leave altogether, which I ultimately did after 3 more years. But in the meantime, I wasn't really ready to leave. I really believed in what we were doing there as a company, and I valued the opportunity to be part of that team. I just needed to find a new position.
Hmm.
And not to beat up the sports analogy, but if I was an all-star second baseman and they told me they had a new hotshot in second base and they wanted me to go to the outfield, well, I had to agree to go to the outfield.
Right. And yeah, that ego death, it really is. Throughout your life, as you go through those experiences, the ego begins to shrink smaller and smaller, and you start to embody more of this higher sense of who you are, this kind of soul level understanding of who you are, that this single human experience isn't necessarily all that there ever will be, that there is multiple lifetimes of experiences that you've gone through, and that this lifetime was giving you such a powerful lesson that you will learn, that you'll be able to use into the future, like in other incarnations and other different lifetimes. You'll be able to use these lessons from this lifetime. And when you view those hard times as these incredibly powerful lessons that you learn, you start to transmute that energy of woe is me into what an incredible opportunity to, again, you've coached 5,000, more than 5,000 people. You've created such a massive change in people's perspectives. Like, how much more powerful does that feel than making all that money at the bank and again, just kind of like going along with another person's dream.
Right, right. Well, and to bring it back to the key topic here, one thing I've done a lot of work in with my clients is the idea of if they're already in a position of leadership with their company, whether they're the owner, founder, or they're in a Fortune 500 management track as a senior leader, what I always end up doing is encouraging them to really do the work to define the leader they think they want to be, because
Mm.
everybody shows up with a unique and different opportunity to be something that is unlike anybody else. I can't be Joe Garner and you can't be Doug Thorpe. I mean, we can share some common values and beliefs, but to think about us as identical replacements for each other, that's just not going to happen.
Right.
And I encourage people to do the work to really kind of build their foundation, potentially in most cases for the very first time. Because inevitably, what happens, particularly in bigger business, people get hired as individual contributors. They work hard and they do good work and they get recognized for it. And the company says, we're going to make you a supervisor. And you do that for a while. And then they say, you're pretty good at this. We're going to make you a manager. And now you're a manager. We're going to make you a director. Now you're a director. We're going to make you a VP. And that is the career journey people go on. But they seldom, if ever, except for maybe the case of having a really strong mentor or an opportunity early on with a coach, they never really think about what does it mean? What is this thing I'm doing and what does it really mean? And more importantly, what do I really believe? And that gets back to that kind of core purpose idea. And I've had so many people when they do the work to really create and design and claim their own leadership framework. Now they have a whole different launch pad to show up. And it's kind of back to your point about they get to show up with a new level of energy, enthusiasm, and commitment to what they're doing. Right. And it becomes a good filter for decision making, for being confident, showing up, avoiding the imposter syndrome, because now they know what they're about, and they've got that sense of purpose and being, and inevitably that propels them to a whole other level of opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah, they have that purpose now that they can essentially, it's a prism that they can view all their life decisions through. We all have these prisms that we view our life decisions through. Some of them are empowering, some of them are disempowering. And when you sit down and do the work, when you actually give yourself time to relax and think about these questions, not just superficial, all right, I'll spend 20 minutes on a worksheet and jot down whatever pops into my head. It's like, no, when you actually quiet the mind and you start to hear from the deeper parts of you, the subconscious mind, you start to hear what that is calling you towards. That's when you have this sense of true purpose. That's when you start to really show up. And again, authenticity. I saw it on your website, what is your authentic style of leadership, I believe is how you phrased
Right.
it. And
Right.
Authenticity is the highest vibration a human can experience. In psychosomatic, like psychopsychology, they talk about like different vibrations of feelings, like jealousy, anger, those are lower vibrations. Love, peace, harmony, those are higher vibrations. But the highest one is this idea of authenticity, to be a human being and authentically radiate this deeper intelligence through your nervous system. That is what is truly the highest vibration that you can get to as a human being on the planet.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that exactly is the byproduct of this work I ask people to do, to really think about and do the really deep search on their sense of what kind of leader do they really want to be. And because it does create a whole nother level of authenticity. And every human being I've ever met has a pretty good, pardon the phrase, I call it the BS meter. When they hear a guy talking, they quickly discern whether the person is being authentic or not. Mm-hmm. And when leaders show up not being authentic, they're trying to give the rah-rah speech about a corporate directive, but they don't believe it. They're not bought in. Everybody's BS meter goes off, and they go, I don't need to listen to this guy. He doesn't even believe it himself, and that's a huge challenge in the bigger companies, and leaders need to be able to be in constant touch with their real sense of purpose and self. And when I do the work with somebody to define this leadership framework, then the next step we do, I actually have them draw a Venn diagram, 3 circles of that definition for themselves. But then also I ask them, can you define what the company is expecting you to be as a leader? And third, what the people around you are expecting you to be as a leader. And see how those 3 circles align. And seldom, if ever, do we get a nice tight stack of pancakes. It's
Right.
there's always outlying elements. And the ultimate question is, and I've had people do that exercise and they say, now I know why I feel so much tension and friction at work because I'm so
Hmm.
far out of alignment with what I believe and what they're asking me to do. Both sides, above and below, what they're being asked to do. And, on a big scale from 1 to 100, one of the extremes is I got to find a new job. This is not a fit for me. It's
Right.
not what I need to be doing.
Yeah, and the longer that you stay in there, the more tension you're going to feel until something breaks, whether that's physical, mental, emotional. Something is going to eventually pull you to where you can no longer be showing up in that position as that role that you don't believe that you are. And it's far better to get out, find a new opportunity before you get to that point. Because if you do
Proactively,
get to
yeah.
that breaking point, yeah, you get to the breaking point, it's an experience. You live through it. Hopefully you land on your feet 6 months, a year later. But it's a difficult place to be, and to right the ship from being turned over is far more difficult than to change course.
Well, Joe, this has been great. I think we're about up on time for today. Tell people the best way to get a hold of you.
Yeah, yeah. The best way to get a hold of me, my website is joegarner.net, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well. I sent over the link, so just yeah, those are the best places to find me. And again, if you're interested, I've got it's basically a 4-week crash course coaching style program where we really just dive into how your mind works, how to gain control of the mind, and then how to use that to start to peel away these layers of who you think that you are and start to really understand that you are so much more than what you've been taught, what you've been told who you are.
Love it. Love it. Well, as always, folks, we will have those links in the show notes, and you can certainly reach out to Joe for that. But one last time, Joe, thank you very much. Really appreciate your insight.
Yeah, this was a great conversation, Doug. I thank you for having me on today.
You bet. Well, folks, I do want to remind you we have a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name. Hop over there, check out the archives, and give us your comments. Would love to hear from you. If you've got an idea for a topic or a guest suggestion, please let me know that. Or if you might want to be my next guest, let me know that too. You can reach me on my website at dougthorpe.com, and I too am all over LinkedIn and most of the social media channels. So feel free to reach out. And for now, I think we're about done. We're going to wrap up, say goodbye. Go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.